Hello, and welcome to the third presentation in our series on some of the updates from the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, OBBBA, or OB3 for short. Today's presentation will be focused on how the OB3 related changes are impacting financial aid systems. We're talking about software, talking about systems here, and in particular, Portico partners and clients, especially because we'll be focusing on how our financial aid software platform, Core, is evolving to support schools and support some of these updated changes. I'm Mark Fuller from the product team here at Portico. Let's get started here. I introduced myself. I think many of these faces are familiar to you already, I imagine, Sarah and Nan, but why don't we do a quick round of introductions?
Hi, everybody. I am Nan Murray. I'm the financial aid product manager here for Core. So I'll be happy to speak to you today about all of the different enhancements that have happened in Core. And I hope this, of course, is enlightening and encouraging. Sarah?
Hey, everybody. Again, I'm Sarah Scott. I'm the FA trainer for Portico. I've been in the industry about 25 years. Like all of you, we are all feeling the stress right now of all these changes that are ongoing. Mark wanted me to show you my goat. This is my screaming goat.
That's how Sarah feels right now.
That's how we all feel right now. But we're here together. We're going to get through this.
Absolutely. So thank you so much for joining us. Hopefully today will be a really helpful introduction and kickoff. We're going to give a bit of a preview of upcoming Core updates related to OB3, discuss how we're approaching system design for the evolving rules, and tackle some of the topics you see here. Obviously, OFA, talking about outside financial assistance, loans, Parent Plus enhancement, school determined limits, and AKA grandfathering or legacy provisions. Nan, I think let's kick it over to you at this point. Anything else you want to say to frame things at the beginning?
No, I think we'll start right off with our outside financial assistance. And we're going to piggyback on what Sarah spoke about and the team spoke about last week, and now show you representations of how Core is translating all these OB3 changes into the system. So what changed? Pell and outside financial aid assistance. So last week we talked about the policy shift. Today we're going to see how the system puts those changes into play. Pell is now conditional on outside financial aid assistance, or I want to say financial assistance. And the timing determines whether action is required. Now, keep in mind for this example that you see on our wonderful board here, we have OFA, which is, let's say, scholarships, grants, and of course, if it is less than your cost of attendance, your student is Pell eligible. So for the example here, the cost of attendance is $25,000. The OFA is $19,500. So that means your Pell is awarded. But of course, what if your OFA is greater than this? Here on the right-hand side, now in Core, without you telling the system anything, if the cost of attendance in this regard, of course, is about $16,000 for this example, once we went ahead and placed this information here for non-T4, we flagged this scholarship as OFA, and what it did was reduce the Pell to 0. Now, this is now an automatic function that is happening in Core. Whenever you go ahead and you flag, and I'll show you, of course, how we're going to flag these fund types in the system, it will go ahead at the time of packaging and it will reduce the Pell. If you wanted to give the student their Pell eligibility, then a decision would have to be made on if you're giving them the full amount of the OFA. Now, the thing that matters as well is timing. If you went ahead and you packaged the students and you awarded them Pell, but at the time of the packaging, there was no OFA that the student was eligible for or awarded, whether it was an external institution or something that you did internally, and the student got their disbursement of Pell, and then they received OFA after, the regulation says if they got the funding, the Pell grant, it was dispersed to them, and then they got OFA after, then they can keep the Pell disbursement. And that's right. Correct, Sarah?
Yeah, that's correct.
All right. So there's only a few listed fund types that are not OFA so far that have been explicitly listed by the Department of Ed, NASPA. One of those, of course, is, and the one that's clearly stated, is VA benefits, right? So that is clearly excluded. The final OFA list from FSA is still pending, and schools, as I said before, may reduce OFA to restore Pell eligibility, but now you don't have to worry that you're going to accidentally give more Pell or go have us any kind of findings because you awarded Pell at the time of attributing the OFA, because the funding estimate will automatically eliminate that for you. Next, here is how we're going to do it in the system. So for our software-only institutions, as well as our full-service institutions, one will need to do some configuration. So once a fund type is flagged in OFA, they're now recognized in the system as such and become part of the need analysis calculation. Nothing is by default. So please note, conversations will need to be had with your financial aid processors. And if you are software-only schools, then within your department, once you have identified a fund type as OFA, you will have the ability to go into core and flag these funds for our 26-27 aid year. Now, these things go into effect as of April 26, but are not used prior. So OFA, of course, is calculated dynamically in the system. Scholarships and grants can be placed as OFA. You do not have the ability, the flag does not represent or reflect in the system on any form of loans. Please note that when you flag the fund type as OFA, when it is unchecked, so when you go into your funding estimate and you're creating a funding estimate, typically the behavior that most of you know about is that auto recalc. Whenever you check auto recalc and you hit save and refresh, it wipes out any form of non-T4 funding that you placed on the funding estimate. That is no longer the case. When you flag a fund type, or when a fund type is flagged as OFA, whenever you put in that non-Title IV fund type into the non-T4 section of core, even with auto recalc set, when you click on it and you want to refresh or save, it's not going to reduce or remove that funding anymore. So that means whenever you're constantly assessing, you're adding new funds, you're changing amounts, you're maybe continuously adding different fund types, you no longer have to worry that it will be taken out of the need analysis calculation. It will go ahead and remain there present for you, which I'm going to show you a representation of that and how we actually flag it in the system. So the Pell logic is enforced automatically. If OFA is greater than COA, then Pell is suppressed or zero out. Pell is calculated independently, so it's not self-reducing. The system behavior is that the OFA funds persist through the save, as I stated before, through auto recalc, so that's included in the need analysis. Invalid entries, so if you put a fund type, but then of course you don't put any amount in those fund type fields, once you hit auto recalc, it will remove that fund type. But if you have any dollar amount greater than zero, it will remain on the funding estimate once you save and refresh. Non-OFA funds will still have the same behavior. So that means, of course, if you save and refresh with auto recalc on, it will remove those that have not been flagged as OFA.
Nan, when you say non-OFA funds, what you mean specifically are things like payment plans, cash payments, foster care benefits, emergency funds, and even other Title IV aid. Is that right? Okay. So everybody remember that in this context of this OB3 regulation, OFA means non-federal grant or scholarship assistance that's been received. So things like payment plans or cash payments that some schools are accustomed to putting in that other aid section on the funding estimate, those aren't going to be counted as OFA for this purpose because those are payments, not receipts. And then private loans are also not federal. And sorry, they're non-federal, but they aren't grants or scholarships. So those would not be flagged as OFA either. And this all has a downstream impact. We have to think of it in two separate logics. So there's this logic to determine Pell eligibility, but then there's the logic that calculates need-based aid, such as the sub, as well as the unsub. So the need-based aid will still factor in the COA minus the SAI minus the Pell minus SUG minus OFA, such as some of these scholarships and grants. And that gives you your need for sub. So we need to separate these concepts in our minds because that's how the funding estimate will now handle them.
So here for our software-only institutions and for a configuration a little bit backend, we go to the fund type options, and it brings us to this page here. So for the grants and non-T4 that we have sub, unsub, we can click on any non-Title IV fund type. We'll click on that, and it's active. We click on the I. And now there is a new flag that says outside financial assistance. This flag is what's controlling it going into the need analysis. So now we're going to move from policy to system. How is CORE interpreting the OB3 loan changes? So what we didn't just add new loans, we taught the system how to recognize who gets them. So OB3 introduced new distinctions. Graduate versus professionals are now treated differently. Loan limits depend on student classification. Classifications come from the ICER, the program level in CORE, progression, and when you are packaging for the entire program. We'll also speak to if you package at each award year separately. We expanded how CORE understands the students. We added the new grade levels which were presented to us from the Department of Ed or FSN. This distinguishes the graduate versus the professional. Prior history was grad and now was professional concurrent enrollment scenarios. The system behavior now dictates grade level set for each program. So we've broken them out into the master's, doctorate, professional. Before we had a combined model. CORE now maps the graduate versus professional and the loan limit rules. We have updated the annual loan limits, the aggregate limits, and based on these diverse classifications. So last week, Sarah and team introduced a chart to you that told us about bringing a student from 138,500 now to 257,500. Also for the professional degrees, we had at one level, we had 20,500 being the max AY limit. And then of course, now migrating to 50,000 for certain professional degrees. These have all been mapped on the back end to now be recognized through the system. And let's talk about how. So at the program level, we have now separated things more clearly. So instead of everything being lumped together, let's say graduate professional, it is now master's, doctoral, and first professional. That allows the system to place students in the correct category from the start.
But we are still getting that grade level from the ICER. That part hasn't changed. So Nan, how does that work if there's not a one-to-one mapping to CORE?
Good question. If you're packaging for the full academic program, the system is using a combination of the program credentials. So let's say you have a graduate, never professional student, and that is how at the program level, it would be denoted in CORE as, let's say, a doctoral degree or first professional degree in CORE. And then when it flows in from the ICER, it is used as a subcategory as defaults to say where that student lies. Now, if you're going for multiple academic years and also the student has history in CORE, it is not only using the program credentials, the ICER information, but also the progression logic. So in that case, the system is doing most of the heavy lifting, especially when we're working across multiple AYs. Now, if you're packaging one academic year at a time, it is relying at the program credential, whether it's master's, doctorate, first professional, and it's also taking the information from the ICER. So the students now have more options to choose when they're choosing their grade level in ICER. So those ICER values still pour into port, as we can see. And just like before, not all students are going to choose the right grade level. So this is where the school comes into play. You will still need to, if this is how you want to make sure everything is going in a linear fashion, you will still need to go ahead and tell your students to go and correct their ICERs if you see the incorrect grade level. However, if it falls in the same category or subcategory, and you are okay with it coming in, let's say, as graduate, never professional, when it was graduate, was professional, and you don't want to have to tell the student to make these changes, you now have the option at the funding estimate level to be able, at the academic level and the funding estimate, you can now go ahead and choose the option, one moment, right here in the funding estimate, so that it attributes the loan information correctly.
So doing one or two of these, one step or the other step is really important, because this is what is directly impacting how these loan limits are applied. So that we really want to stress that to everybody.
Correct. The system is not the authority. The financial aid professional is always. However, POR gives you a strong starting point. This allows flexibilities for school to ensure accuracy, but we set up gating to make sure that student mistakes, when evident, guidance when timely, and manual provisions at the FA level is right at your fingertips. So here we set it up in the program. It establishes a grade level. We can always put at the academic level what the fields, and of course we can associate it to give the right loan limits in the funding estimate. So here we're going to dig a little bit deeper into school determined loan limits and plus enhancements. Now, this is something a little bit new that was never really introduced before. So we can now configure this for the institution. If you want to go ahead and set up a loan limit for any particular programming course. So this is our test site. Now you have an icon where you can configure the loan limits. And please note, this is also a conversation with your FA rep. At this level, we have dependent and independent students. And on the right-hand side, that there are preset limits for each of these grade levels. Now we can go ahead and configure how much we want to be able to award a student at any particular grade level. Even though their max eligibility is preset, we can now set a different limit, and that limit will now propagate within the funding estimate. So what does that mean, really? Usually a student would get a max eligibility as a dependent student or an independent student for 2,000 or 6,000. When you're generating your funding estimate, if you have configured this section, you will be able to set it up for an institution. Now, you see in this example how I set the limits, but I did not choose any particular programs. You would now have to go ahead and select the programs that you want these limitations to be attributed to. So there's an indicator to show that you haven't set it up by a program. Now that we have gone ahead and set it up, I'm going to go ahead and click save. Oh, look, it shows me that I've exceeded the limits for any particular program that I set up or that I have left it empty. So I'll go ahead and make the change in each of these by removing a 0 and changing the amounts. Once you've made the changes, go ahead and save, or you can add another set. So if you don't want that to govern each and every program, you can set up additional programs and set up the loan limits for those programs. And then you can hit save. Please note, the programs that you choose above will not need the drop down below. Once there's no errors, it will save and navigate you back to the screen. When looking at the loan limits once again, you'll be able to see which have been configured. The last that you did will be placed at the top. And it goes in that case, it's going to say descending order. I think that's the right way to say it, descending order. So when you create the funding estimate, what will occur is that instead of seeing those max eligibilities, you will now go ahead and see the amount that you configured for that student. So their max eligibilities will remain the same, but the amount that will come up in the field that show the amount of the loans that are dispersed, it would not disperse. Let's say if we had a $3,000 loan limit and that was the max eligibility, it would have gone ahead and put 1,000. But now that we have reduced that to 2,000, Sarah, I'm really bad at math. You're the trainer. What is 2,000 divided by 3?
Wait, let me use my handy dandy calculator. 667, 667, 666.
All right. So that means whenever you generate the funding estimate, instead of you seeing the normal breakout of 1,000 across 3 terms, for example, you would now see it broken out into 667, 667, 666, because you have configured this loan amount. Now, this may be a nifty way to help our students to not go over the amount that they need in order to matriculate through their degree with lesser debt. So it may help with debt management. It gives the schools the tools to say, this is how much we see and know that it takes to take this program. And we are now assisting our students based on their selections, most of the times through the credit balance statements or the conversations that you've had with your students. You can now configure these programs separately or combined. Now, in the same area, we have plus loans, and that has been broken out a bit. It's the same process for plus loans, but seeing that plus loans have different limits, this is now going to our students that are not grandfathered. So the plus loan configuration is not going to be governing our students that are grandfathered in the system. It only governs students that are not grandfathered. So here in the plus loan section, we are able to go and place the amounts needed for the lifetime eligibility. So even though I'm placing very small amounts here, the amounts that you cannot exceed in this space is $65,000. So as you see here, one of the amounts that I placed was 100, I believe it's 135,000, maybe I gave them a million, I'm not quite sure. But the system is going to stop us from being able to exceed their lifetime eligibility. So if you wanted to go ahead, keep in mind, it is now set up with our cap. The cap that we have in the max, right? So we are now able to say each academic year is 20K. The system already knows that. So there's a few things that are gatekeep. There's some gatekeeping that happens, right? If you wanted, when you're creating a funding estimate now, on the first page where you're choosing the existing packaging for the student and you are pulling in the ICER information, you will now see a checkbox. And the checkbox tells you to use the max plus loan amount. The checkbox allows you to utilize the predefined and configured space that you've had for your plus loan. So even though a student may have a total amount of $65,000 ag limit with a 20K cap, you can determine that for this program, for whatever reason, that is not going to take more than $30,000 in plus loans to get the student over the hill. So now you can go ahead and use that pre-configured amount to make sure that even if your FA reps were to try and attribute more than that, they now know that it's their max for this, or the amount that they can configure is going to be the lesser of whatever is configured in the system, and not what the max is for 65,000 for that student's 3 years or 3.5 years. So there's
wait
another.
a minute, Nan, wait a minute.
Uh-huh.
Is this for all students, or is this just for those that are not grandfathered?
That's a great question. And that is a very important distinction. This applies specifically to students that are not grandfathered. Okay. You will not see any change in the system for your students that are grandfathered. You'll still have the same flexibility. You'll still be able to attribute the plus loans. Even if there's a different, if they've used more than 65,000, they'll still have their eligibility as long as they're grandfathered. So what we went ahead and did for our grandfathered, for our students, some of our students, when you're creating the funding estimate for them and you're independent students, and because independent students no longer get plus loans, when you create a funding estimate for an independent student, you no longer see any form of plus loans. You don't have the field there anymore. So we did not want there to be any confusion, because this is not just a change by OB3. This is a process change, right? You're used to being able to give plus loans to students no matter what their dependency statuses were. So instead of creating a field and leaving it disabled or grayed out and create ambiguity, especially when there's so many new things to learn, we went ahead and removed that ambiguity altogether. So whenever you're creating a funding estimate for a student that is independent, you will no longer see the plus loan field on the funding estimate. So let's talk a little bit more about the plus loan enhancement. For our students that are not grandfathered, you will now see new fields on the actual funding estimate. So you will see the aggregate parent plus. It is a new field. It is populated from what we're getting in from the ICER, from the National Student Loan Database. And it is the total parent plus amount borrowed to date. Also, for multi-year packaging behavior, you will see that for your academic year COA, your limits annually is 20,000. And of course, it cannot exceed your COA. So what does that mean? Now the system is going to assist you in applying your plus loans. And that means it is going to look at one, how much did you already use in plus loans, which is coming in from the ICER. So that's a no-brainer. It's coming into the system. It's telling us that information. It's also keeping you gated by saying, hey, if you try to give a student $33,000 in one term, or I want to say one academic year to be very specific, if you try to give a student $33,000 in one academic year, you would not be able to do that. The system is going to, once you save it, it's going to reduce it to anywhere below 20,000. Like it's going to actually generate an amount in the funding estimate that is below $20,000. So that's something that you've never really seen before, because you just type in the plus loan amount into the system. Now it's actually generating it for you with those parameters set, and it's taking into account the cost of attendance. So let's look at this example. The system is now calculating the eligibility of plus loan per term, and it is summed here in the net. Sorry about that. So it's staying within certain constraints per term, leading up to the 20,000 annual cap. The calculations here is that the COA is 33,405. The total aid that's being given is 12,895, and the total amount of OFA, which is here, is 5,510. With the plus cap being 20,000, you cannot go over COA. So the total amount that is being given gross in the parent plus is $15,000. This has now been built into the system, and it is calculating this for you based on your federal limits.
And this is really in a similar fashion to how we are all already used to seeing sub and unsub, follow that same logic. The funding estimate uses the data that's entered on the estimate, makes that determination, and it puts that in that max eligibility field. So this logic is now going to be applied to the plus. So you won't have any question about going over your limits. There's already these guardrails in place. So it makes that evaluation of the eligibility. And then, of course, you as the FA rep and, of course, confrontation with the student we can determine maybe it needs to be less. Maybe they don't need that full amount, but that full amount will be guardrailed.
So last but not least, and one of the most asked questions and the ones that make Sarah open up her throat card and scream is our grandfather indicators.
It's true.
So
Very true.
it's what stresses a lot of people out. We have gone ahead and tagged and flagged to our heart's content to show all of you exactly that your students are grandfathered. So for students' records, we have flagged grandfathered. You need to be active and on an approved leave of absence. We have direct loan disbursements associated with the package that was prior to June 30th of 2026. Those conditions met, the system calculates the end date for the grandfathering eligibility, and we've gone ahead and put this nifty little icon for everything that applies. It is not static, it's calculated and tracked and updated at the packaging level and is visualized throughout the system. Also, if you wanted to find out when it ends, you simply have to hover over it. And it tells you a nice little message here that indicates to you for your student that the date that, of course, that student is grandfathered until. So a lot of you may have questions about when or how this could go away. So today you saw it, but tomorrow it went away. Sarah? What
So
happened?
there are definitely a few reasons why grandfathering will go away, like Nan said. So enrollment status has changed. That change, for example, if they withdraw or they transfer out of that program, that will do away with the grandfathering. If they change their program altogether, that'll do away with the grandfathering. Any change in the packaging structure, this won't happen for most of you, but some of you that might be in the midst of resolving a program that already exists. Maybe it's going from a clock hour structure to a standard term structure. FSA has advised that will break the grandfathering. So be very mindful of that if you are looking to go into that concept. And I do want to point out here for this grandfathering date, remember that the pace of completion will not change. So if the student has a remaining 2 years in their program until they complete, if they were attending full time, and they decide halfway through that they can't keep up with that full-time course load, so they drop down to part-time, that's fine, but they need to be aware that the grandfathering will not extend because they have decided to drop down in that course load. The same thing would apply if they need to do a retake, or even if they're on an approved LOA. Approved LOA does not break grandfathering, but it also does not extend the period of time that the student will be eligible for that grandfathering. That time to completion in relation to grandfathering does not change. So as we stressed last week, as Shauna stressed last week, close communication with your academics team is really important here. Back to you, Mark, or Nan.
So I want to implore everyone who is going to visit us at Momentum to bring your laptops. We're going to have the product section. We're going to talk to you more about the system. And this is going to be an opportunity for you to see the system in action. You have your own students. You have your own cohorts. You have students with tricky situations, and you have students that you have different amount of loans or credits for different terms, and you want to see and play around with, and I stress the words play around with, all these different scenarios in the core environment. We will be there. Sarah will be there. I will be here, and we'll be able to show you the system in action, and you'll be able to see those students for yourself. So if nothing else, I want you to relax while you're there as well and absorb all the information, but also bring your laptops and we can all work together to see how CORE is going to support you with OB3 and for you to get acclimated in an enhanced environment. I'll turn it back over to you, Mark.
For most of our existing partners and clients and users, you probably already know this, but just a friendly reminder, as always, that we have a range of software and service offerings. That's from processing and verification to our newer student support service offering that we have available. So everything you see here and beyond to help you and help your team. And then finally, I wanted to call out, we have a brand new online training platform, essentially. We're calling it Portico Pathways. And basically, it's a kind of a web-based, on-demand, self-paced, go as you wish series of online kind of lessons and courses available for you and your colleagues and your staff. This is completely free to Portico clients. It's available to you and your colleagues and your teams if you're a current client. It's 3 courses to start, the ones you mentioned here, the Career Education Foundations course, a Financial Aid Specialist course, and an Academic Specialist course, which will be coming out soon. And then we'll have others releasing later in the year as well. And this includes everything. There's self-paced, they're easy, there's compliance refreshers, there's role-based information, and of course, training on our actual products themselves and our software itself. And this is relevant because I want to mention that we'll be also adding some OB3 information and modules into the financial aid course in the near future. So for those that want some additional training, want something they can go back to over and over again, beyond the website and the other materials we put out, as signing up for that financial aid specialist course. And then once we have some of the OB3 content in there, that will be reflected to anyone who's interested. So you can always reach out, send us an email, and hopefully it's something you can take advantage of. Without further ado, thank you. Thank you everyone for joining us, whether today is your first time joining us or this is the 3rd in the series that you've been attending. Thank you to our presenters. And as I mentioned before, we'll follow up with any questions that kind of came in or we weren't able to answer today. But thanks so much and talk to you soon.